This is a map from April 3, but honestly, it hasn't changed a whole lot. Step 1, a northern invasion down to Kiev. Now, we all know this kind of fell apart, but different sides took different lessons. Now, I know that the folks at DoD, when they saw this and they saw the convoy that was coming, the 40-mile convoy, and how it stopped after a day because they forgot to bring fuel, I know there's this initial bit of euphoria that, holy crap, we can totally take the Russians in a fight. And then everyone had a nap and thought about it, and confidence went to fear. Because now we know that if there's ever a direct confrontation between NATO forces and Russian forces, the Russian forces will be completely obliterated. And the Russians will have a choice between a broad scale retreat at all points of contact, probably back to maybe even beyond the pre-war borders, or escalation. So we now know we have to prevent that conflict from ever happening. So any system that we can send the Ukrainians, anything they can operate themselves or that can be handled with like 48 hours of training, no more than that, they're getting. And people, NATO countries, are emptying out their stores. The Canadians have already run out of stuff to send, which, and I know, Canada doesn't have much of a military anymore, but still, we can't send them anything with a logistical tail, because a logistical tail would require American forces to defend it, and then we would have that direct confrontation. So there's a handoff in NATO countries, the Ukrainians drive it or train it or truck it or whatever happens to be from there. And that's now policy because we're rightly horrified of what will happen if we have that direct confrontation. Next, starting in the separatist territories in the east and Crimea, the convergence upon Mariupol. Mariupol is important for more than just a land bridge. There's a road nexus there that connects Russia proper into Crimea and on into the rest of Ukraine. And if the Russians fail to secure Mariupol to their liking, then the only way that the forces in Crimea can be resupplied is through a single bridge over the Kerch Strait. And now that the United States is sending longer range weapons into Ukraine, that bridge is not long for this world, which means that Mariupol will be the only way that the Russians can supply Crimea. Keep in mind that Crimea is not an agricultural region, so all the food for the entire population there has to be imported via Russia, and once they lose that one rail line over that one bridge, Mariupol is it. So if there's going to be a counterstrike that matters by the Ukrainians, that's where it has to go. And so the Russians feel they have to take that as thoroughly and as quickly as possible. We're going to have a couple pincher actions in attempting to hive off the regular Ukrainian army from everywhere else. I'd say that the Russians are actually doing a decent-ish job of doing that right now. And then the push that I'm most concerned about personally would start in Crimea and go over to Odessa. This probably can't happen until Mariupol is completely secured. But once they get to Odessa, they will have shut off all Ukrainian exports of all type, any chance of reinforcement from the sea, and then it's a short push to Moldova where they already have forces, and then Romania is just right next door. So that's kind of where I see the war going for about the next 2 months. The Ukrainians are definitely overperforming, and the Russians are definitely underperforming. But the war in eastern Ukraine now is it's an artillery battle. And this is literally what the Russians have preferred in their wars going back to World War I. And if they don't win that, then we can talk about a war scenario where the Ukrainians might actually win this. But everything in the war right now, in my opinion, is playing to Russia's strengths rather than its weaknesses. And I don't think we've begun to see the level of devastation that is really in store here. Because the lesson that the Russians took away from Kiev is that they can't capture this going softly. And so we're seeing a civilian obliteration program for all infrastructure. The idea being that if you level an urban area, people will fall into one of two buckets. They self-segregate. One group becomes refugees and they leave and you never have to worry about them again. And anyone who remains behind is a soldier and you can shoot them on sight. And we know from German radio intercepts that the Bucha massacres were not a one-off. That's happened dozens of times in Russian occupied territory. The Russians know they don't have the population at home to repopulate this area once they take it, and so they really don't care what happens to the civilian infrastructure. We've seen them going after absolutely everything with a special emphasis on cold chain logistics for food, grain storage, and they've done what they can to damage the port of Odessa already in terms of their offloading facilities. So when they're done, there is not going to be a whole lot left in any of the zones they've gone through. That's just what artillery wars are like. Okay. Let's talk about the energy angle from the Russian point of view. The green lines are oil pipelines, the red lines are natural gas pipelines, and the dotted red along the western side of the former Soviet space is where the Russians ultimately would like to get to. First things first, the Turkish Straits. About 1.5 million barrels of Russian crude transit the Straits every year, and whenever it happens, the Turks often have to shut down traffic in both directions for some of the bigger tankers. The largest tanker that can make it through there is a 1 million barrel per day, so like a half super tanker. The Turks have activated the Treaty of Montreux that allows them to block the military passage of any belligerents at any time. Now, that means that the Russians right now cannot get their warships in and out. At the moment, the Turks are still allowing commercial cargo, but with a change in mind in Ankara, that could flip overnight. Novorossiysk, this is the primary oil offloading facility for the Russians. It has the capacity to offload about 2 million barrels a day, but it usually doesn't operate any faster than about 1.4. It's in a war zone. It's in the northern half of the Black Sea. The Russians have hit a few ships. And a little quirk of maritime law is that when there's active shooters in the area, most private insurance companies like Lloyd's of London suspend all coverage for any vessels in the area, so the vessels don't go there because the ships are too expensive. The shipping companies can't afford a loss. So Novorossiysk has been operating below 20% capacity now since the beginning of the war. I don't expect that to increase. Up north, you have Primorsk, which is on the Baltic, almost as large as Novorossiysk, similar volumes, about 1.4. It's their second largest export point. Now, there's no war danger up here. The problem here is that shipping companies are refusing to go in, ship captains are refusing to go in, and most importantly, Primorsk is a shallow water port and can only take shuttle tankers. So if you want to, say, send crude to India, what you've got to do is put 6 or 7 shuttle tankers into Novorossiysk with your own sovereign indemnification, sail them out into the Baltic where it's deeper, roughly to Denmark, and then within sight of a NATO port, somehow get someone to bring out a half dozen tugs to push 2 tankers together so you can offload from one to the other. That's a tall order. Some countries have done that and somehow think that the NATO countries are going to be okay with this in the long run. But that's the only way you can get the oil onto a tanker that is big enough to do a long multi-continental sail.